there are no activists in my family. And I grew up during the civil rights movement, and people were kind of asked to choose sides. And there was really very little there was no middle ground. You know, either you were in favor of, you know, what we say civil rights, but that's not what it was called when I was growing up. You know, you were in favor of the black people. And so you had to be either on one side or the other. So that's kind of where my activism began. I grew up in a very racist culture. I don't know why I found it so disgusting. You know, I was taught differently in the church. I was taught differently in the schoolrooms, you know, but in the broader society, it was very hateful. I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and there were some major battles of the civil rights movement that went on there, the segregation of the schools and then the open housing movement, and they both were incredibly violent. And, you know, they made the national newspapers at the time, so that's kind of what I grew up in. So just not willing to be critical of Martin Luther King made you a bad person. You can't understand how hated he was, especially in the South. But, you know, across the country, most people disapproved of what he was doing when he was doing it. And now it's different. Most people approve of it. But
and you went back and forth between Kentucky and Los Angeles?
We moved out there when I was 11 years old. And I was out there for probably a year and a half, and then we moved back to Louisville, and I was there for a little while, and then we moved back once again. I think I was there for 4 years. So I was influenced by being in Los Angeles, where there was no civil rights movement. There was a lot of, I mean, went to a very integrated high school. It wasn't just African Americans and Hispanics, but Tongans and Senegalese. Just, you can't imagine. It was like completely different, you know, group of people than I would have gone to school with in Louisville, of course. So that was really helpful to broaden, you know, my appreciation of, you know, just what other people see the world as. You know, it's just not just one way of looking at it. But so I got involved then in the anti-Vietnam War, as many people were, and so that's not something I just embarked with on my own, but many of my friends, you know, we were having the same questions, and some of us started going to demonstrations, you know, not very many, but I did, and then I was arrested at one when I was quite young, and then that's really kind of what radicalized me. I realized I you know, I wasn't read my rights. I was a juvenile. I was thrown in with the adults. They beat me up. You know, they gave me a cold bologna sandwich. You know, I was mad.
And that was LA County?
Yeah, that was LA County.
And you wrote in the book that your brother had already been there.
Yeah, he had already been there.
Was he a hippie?
Yeah, he was a hippie. He was more of a stoner. He liked to deal drugs. But, you know, there was kind of a hardcore hippie sect. There are a lot of different groups in LA, of course, but they liked to take Seconals, and they were a rough crowd. They were hillbilly hippies. And, you know, they were into fighting, and I mean, I guess you would almost call them gangs now, but I wasn't in any of the gangs in LA. There was a lot of different ones. I never picked one, you know, and I kind of stayed in between things.
All right. Well, you write a lot in your book about how the media factors in to the equation with environmental activists and industry. Could you speak a little bit about how the media has influenced your work?
When I first got involved, if you're trying to save a creek or a waterfall or a lake or a wilderness area or whatever, right, you had to, it usually was logging or maybe a road, or sometimes, you know, in some cases it would be an oil well, but it would be something. So you're trying to get the media involved, right, before it happens. And right now it's just so they're floating the idea around, or maybe there's a formal proposal, or, you know, maybe it's even moved through the process and you're involved in an environmental impact statement. And so we would try to get the media involved, and the only thing you could do is try to get somebody from the outdoor section, the outdoor editor, to walk up the creek and then write a story about how nice the creek was. That might take a month. And then you have that one tour a day and maybe one or two other media come, probably not. So you get this little story. That's it. And then, the decision comes down. And they're going to build a road. They're going to put in the timber sale or the oil well or whatever. And so you have a press conference. And you show up, and back then, this is what you would have seen. You would have seen 2 or 3 white guys in suits with ties, with nice haircuts, going, "This is wrong. We're opposed to this." And the media would go, "Okay, what are you going to do about it?" And they'd go, "Well, we're going to appeal, or we're going to sue, or we're going to write a letter, or we're not going to stand for it, or whatever." But that would pretty much be it. And then the media would go back to their office, and they got no story. Nothing, So the purpose of introducing nonviolent direct action was that they love confrontation. And a lot of other things sprang out of this, but it wasn't, like I remember going to a meeting with the Wilderness Society and the Sierra Club and all the major national organizations, big meeting in Eugene. And they invited us dirtbag, activists. I was probably, 25 years old back then, maybe 30. That was 1984. So the woman from the Wilderness Society goes, you're never going to get to spot it out on the front page, And I'm just looking at her and go, with an attitude like that, you're right. It ain't never going to happen. And if they think, well, they've already gotten the old growth, we need to fight for these scenic rivers or these high elevation wilderness areas, what Howie Wolk used to call the rock in the ice, the lava fields, the stuff that they didn't want anyway. And not to fight over these really valuable areas like the old growth forest. There's trees, some of them were worth $20,000 each, standing up, before they even cut them down. Yeah. So they didn't want to fight. But, we took the fight to them. And it wasn't a week later that we had done one of the first tree sits, especially it was probably the second tree sit. And we hung a banner that said, "Give a hoot, save the spotted owl." It was on the front page of the Oregonian. It was on the front page of the Eugene Register Guard. And it made all the other newspapers, not the front page, up and down the West Coast. So they were overlooking a strategy, a tactic, something that would have gotten them through this lack of interest by the media. So, you can blame the media for not covering you, but I don't think you can blame them until you've tried everything to get them to do something. And they obviously hadn't tried that. It worked. It still works. It doesn't work quite as well as it does if it's just done the same way. I mean, there needs to be innovation at all points, but it was so unusual for anyone to take the fight into the forest, to confront the loggers themselves, and they're very intimidating. And even I would have to say these are dangerous situations when that happens. And even with the law enforcement, it's dangerous because there's no witnesses. You don't have hundreds of people like you did with Occupy. Most of the actions that we did were 12 or 24 people. And some of the bigger ones were just a couple hundred people. And in those cases, you'd have more cops than you would protesters. So even then, the potential for violence was always very, very high.